This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Khannam.
And I'm Jamal Dejani.
Well, Jamal, welcome to the 46th President of the United States of America. Joseph R. Biden was sworn in yesterday as our 46th president. Kamala Harris took over as the first woman of color, African American, South Asian woman as vice president and the most powerful woman in U.S. political history. And we are on the dawn of a new administration, which was inaugurated yesterday. And that's juxtaposed next to what turns out to be really significant and damaging impact of the COVID-19 virus, Jamal. 400,000 Americans have died from COVID. It looks like that number is going to go to 500,000 Americans dead before the end of, by February sometime. The unemployment numbers, almost 1 million people filed for unemployment last week, Jamal. So on the one hand, we have a new administration, but on the other hand, this country is facing potentially catastrophic, dangerous, and debilitating impacts economically and medically. So it's a tale of two cities right now, Jamal.
And talking about a tale of two cities, let's talk about the capital, Washington, D.C. I mean, we spoke last week about the insurrection and the terrorists storming into the Capitol, and then thousands of National Guardsmen and women have descended into the Capitol. High alert. Of course, yesterday, everybody was watching the inauguration, the festivities, the fireworks. Very, very high security, but the high security has remained because there were some bomb threats and death threats. So we had a conversation with our reporter in Washington, D.C., Phil Pasquini. Let's take a look at that. Daily life in Washington, D.C. is starting to return to semi-normal, but heightened security continues, as you can see with our reporter joining us from Washington, D.C., Phil Pasquini. Phil, tell us what's going on there. I see behind you is the National Guard.
Correct. All the numbered streets going through the city for the downtown area are still blocked by the National Guard. And according to some sources, this is going to remain this way for several days, if not weeks. They're hoping to open it up, and the city overnight has transformed itself somewhat. The areas have been opened up to pedestrians again, but crosstown traffic is going to be a nightmare for the next few days, as I said. The bridges are open. They did want to close them completely, but there was such a backlash from that they only closed them partially and for a few hours before they reopened. But right now, we still see National Guard posted on each street corner, each alleyway, and blocking all of the streets crosstown. The mall is still closed. But I think overall, the tempo and the temperament of the city has changed tremendously. When Trump's Air Force One wheels lifted off the ground, you could feel a lightening of the burden that people have suffered through here and across the country for 4 years under his domain. And with Biden's great presentation yesterday and a wonderful news conference last night, which I'm sure you saw, we were informed, we were respected, we were given pertinent information and direction. These are all things that a good leader will do, and we haven't had that for 4 years. So Washingtonians in general are feeling much more positive about the future, as I'm sure most Americans are across country.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the celebrations yesterday. I don't know if people in Washington were able to see the fireworks or even come close to the parade, or it just was something that we saw on TV because of the heightened security. Were you able to get close to these festivities?
Yes, I couldn't see the fireworks because I'm about a mile from the White House where they were occurring, but most people did watch them on television. Yesterday, you could get to Pennsylvania Avenue if you wanted to wait in a non-socially distanced line for about a half an hour while you went through security and bag checks. So the number of people lining Pennsylvania Avenue was pretty small. I think the preponderance, the greatest number of people that we saw where national and international press, both television and print journalists, inhabiting most of the city. But as far as the number of people on the street, it's diminished appreciably. And today is also included in the warning that had been issued for securitization of the city. Tomorrow, things are supposed to lighten up a bit more, but we'll have to wait and see what happens between now and then, of course.
So today is what we call the day after, or the day after Trump. What's the mood like in the city, at least in the United States Capitol?
Well, I'm smiling and you probably can't see it. But people feel very positive. I just had a lady come up to me and say, God, thank God that guy is gone. We're finally going to get something new and efficient again that we need. And that's pretty much the general mood overall. I mean, everybody feels very relieved that the tyrant is no longer in the White House. He can't destroy anything else now. He's limited. And I think that's probably people are feeling that nationwide. But of course, we have to remember only about half the people in the country voted for him, or less than half. So there's still those out there who firmly believe in all the fantasies and QAnon and everything else. But that's pretty much the pace now. I know I was here during the election in 2016, and after Trump was elected, you could feel people were just so depressed. It had a terribly different tempo than it does now. So that's been relieved greatly, and I think everybody's appreciative of it at this point as well.
We hear about the threats, of course, from the FBI and other security agencies. But have you seen anything on the ground, like anything like demonstrators or from those, I would say, insurrectionists? Did they return to try to disrupt things, or they kept them at bay?
No, they haven't come. They haven't come back. I think they realize that if they come back and they want to storm the Capitol again, they're going to pay for it, physically and in blood. And I only saw two people with Trump regalia on, and it was very muted. It wasn't wrapped in flags. A woman had a MAGA hat on, and she was giving an interview to someone, an international press person, explaining how once again, the phony narrative of the election had been ripped off. Another guy had a sign about the conspiracy for 9/11 and how the Democrats were involved in it and the government's behind it. The QAnon people from Ohio last week went to the now infamous pizza parlor, but outside of Washington, had a demonstration talking about young boys being chopped up and sprinkled on pizza. If they can't even, this is like fiction that nobody would believe even then. And they tried to drown out the patrons, but the music at the pizza restaurant was turned up, and all the patrons walked outside and started harassing them to the point where it was described. They turned around and got onto a bus that had Ohio plates on it and left. So there hasn't been really, there have been, I think, 3 arrests so far for concealed weapons and ammunition and so on. I did see one woman yesterday harassing some Secret Service officers at a checkpoint, and they diffused that rather quickly. They weren't, the level of tolerance has diminished greatly. So if you want to come and demonstrate, and there was a demonstration yesterday, it was permitted for 100 people. They were Trump supporters. I believe it was at the Navy Memorial on Pennsylvania Avenue. They were strictly limited to that number, and I didn't see anybody going to it or coming from it. So they've either, taken different routes, or they've managed to keep all the normal regalia, the flag on the flag shaft and so forth, off of the streets altogether.
Well, it's good. Obviously, it's good after what happened to keep these, what I call, most of them were, white supremacist terrorists storming the Capitol, and you want to make sure that the inauguration went all right. But again, I'm just looking at you now and seeing, the military truck behind you. These are sights or scenes that I was used to seeing, and you yourself when we were traveling overseas in Cairo or in other, Middle Eastern countries or other countries around the world. But, this is Washington, D.C. How much tolerance do you think the American public will put up with seeing, basically Washington, D.C. turning to a garrison?
Well, it's interesting because my experience, like yours, has always been that I'm used to this. It's maybe jaded to the fact that there are military and armed soldiers and checkpoints and so on from having worked in Palestine and Israel and in the Middle East and Turkey and so forth. But for Americans, it's an unusual scene. Some people are very frightened by it. They're staying off the streets and staying home. They're adhering to all the warnings. Others are seemingly less jaded. I see people stopping all the time, taking photographs, greeting the troops, telling them they appreciate their efforts on our behalf. A lot of people are taking pictures with them and of them, and they've been very cordial in return. They haven't acted, overtly or been difficult to deal with at all. They're pretty straightforward for the most part. But I think that it's going to wear, on people's nerves after a while. I mean, we're now talking about, this is the second week that we've had large numbers and now up to 25,000 troops in the streets. They are armed. Their weapons are not loaded. So if you're not familiar with weapons and you see the weapon, it's very intimidating. If you realize it's not loaded, it's just a guy standing around with a gun, They're not as threatening to me as these white supremacists are who show up with their free speech and Second Amendment rights, asserting them in state capitals, and those guns are loaded and ready to go. So we have a real difference, but it's an unusual scene in America, and it's something I think we're going to have to get used to for a while. I hope it won't be long, and I hope this would all end quickly, but the threats keep coming in, and people keep doing stupid things, so we just have to tolerate it, I suppose, as best we can.
Well, Phil, stay safe, and we'll just come back to you for another report, from Washington, D.C. Hopefully things will come back to normal.
Yeah, they are. They're coming back slowly, but, we're moving in the right direction. I think that's the positive thing about it. The Capitol, I'm sure, will be secure for a long time. It's going to be difficult getting in there in the future. I think we lost our naivete, if you will, by the insurrection that was committed by what I call the village people, characters with the hoods and the horns and the rest of the stuff. But I think we're on the right track, and I'm sure Biden will. I know he has a tremendous amount of work ahead of him, a great deal to undo, but I feel positive about the future as we unfold into this new era after Trump.
That's the voice of Phil Pasquini reporting to us from Washington, D.C.
That's Phil Pasquini, Arab Talk correspondent in Washington, D.C. So, Jamal, we know that, what happened after January 6th with the attempted coup d'etat with our domestic white supremacist terrorists that took over the Capitol, that security would be difficult. But I was under the mistaken impression that up into the leading to the inauguration and yesterday, things were just very secure and fine. Apparently that wasn't so, according to Phil.
Yeah, well, as you saw in the interview, Phil was standing in front of a National Guard's truck, Jess. So you have a militarized Washington, D.C., a scene I'm used of seeing when I've traveled into Egypt during, the Arab Spring and Tunisia and so forth, or a scene that Americans are not really used to seeing in their cities, especially in the capital city. But apparently all over Washington, D.C., you have all these trucks, you have barriers, barricades, checkpoints. I mean, it's almost impossible unless you have the proper credentials to come anywhere near the White House or Capitol Hill.
Well, Jamal, I think, as time goes on, we're 2 weeks after what happened on January 6th. As I mentioned, the attempted coup d'etat. People's initial reaction was it was just a bunch of really stupid, white people, essentially, who decided to just, for fun, storm the Capitol. But the real disturbing information that we're now getting about what happened on that day is that it was organized, it was planned, it was fomented. There was highly elaborated discussions going on, and the FBI has rounded up and arrested over 100 people. Hundreds more will be arrested and charged. One person has, at least one, possibly two, has been arrested for conspiracy, which we'll get to a little bit later because that's really very significant in terms of the anti-terrorism laws. But as we're finding out, Jamal, as we look back on this and as historians look back on this, we'll look back at what happened on January 6th as a very close call and brush with an attack on the very foundation of the democracy. Former Vice President Pence, Speaker Pelosi could have been captured, tried, and possibly assassinated. Other targeted Congress folks, men and women, but especially the squad, AOC, Ilhan Omar, and Rashida Tlaib could have been captured, arrested, tried, and possibly assassinated. As time goes on, Jamal, this whole, travesty of January 6th was much worse than we all realized.
You're absolutely correct, Jess. And we'll find out more. But just in this past week, because of all the different recordings, the security cameras in the Capitol, people's cameras, selfies, and even the perpetrators themselves, recording themselves to post online and so forth. You've had people communicating with each other, which the FBI recently released some voice recordings giving instructions.
Right.
Go here, go there, like a real organized, militarized type of coup. You've had, calls from outside giving directions, not only amongst the perpetrators, but people from out of state also calling, giving directions. People who are very familiar with the plan of the Capitol. They kind of like, just like you watch in the movies, like somebody's looking over some construction plans of the Capitol, telling people what floor to be at, what hallways, and so forth. And then, of course, you had the death threats. They found out also some bombs. They had people with a lot of ammo coming in. I mean, there was a plan, what it seems like, that could have ended up in a hostage taking of the senators and congressmen and congresswomen, or of course the killing. So what I would say, this country has dodged a bullet.
Yeah.
I mean, this is how we'll look at it. It looks horrible. It looks terrible, but we have dodged a bullet in essence, that luckily the lawmakers were not hurt, even though, a policeman was killed and others were killed and hurt. But this was an organized thing that we have never seen before or haven't seen for many, many, many years. And again, you look at the scene now, and it's exactly a scene of a country under siege, a scene that you are accustomed to see in other countries, where you have the military, the National Guard, you have tons and tons of policemen from all over, FBI, security. I mean, if you go to, from the description that we've seen and we've talked to Phil Pasquini, Washington, D.C. is like under a siege. I mean, this is not the Washington, D.C. I was like kind of reflecting at it, thinking about a couple of months from now, or you have millions of tourists usually descend on Washington, D.C. You have the cherry blossom. That's
right.
Kind of Washington, D.C.
Right.
is very famous for early spring. And then the tourists, of course, life has changed because of COVID. You have less people to begin with, and places people would go to the Smithsonian, but it looks like a ghost town. Well, it looks like a ghost town.
But in reality, Jamal, this is why I think many people are still in denial about what happened. Yes, there's a COVID restriction and people cannot travel, but because of the militarized presence, finally, after 240 plus years, maybe for the first time in our nation's history, we're facing up to the grim reality that the real danger to democracy of this country is not from outside this country, but from within. And the long original sin of this country, slavery and ethnic cleansing, that stain has never been cleaned, it's never been addressed. And in this last 4 years, we have found out that it has been encouraged, fomented. Gasoline has been poured on it by the former President Trump. And that the biggest threat to this country's integrity as a democratic republic are really white supremacists from within this country. And I still think we're in denial about this. I still think if you look at the coverage yesterday from the mainstream media, there was some discussion of what happened on January 6th, but everybody was uplifted, everybody was hopeful. And although I think it's important to be hopeful about, the future, even though it looks pretty grim right now, the reality of what happened and the reality of what's still in this country, the reality that there are still hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans who still don't believe that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are the legitimate president and vice president of the United States. You still have senators who are parroting Trump-like talking points. Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz today. I mean, many Republicans are going to still double down on the Trump narrative. We are not out of the woods. Maybe we dodged one bullet, as you said, Jamal, but there are a lot of other bullets that are loaded and are chambered and ready to be fired, in my opinion. And I don't think we can rest right now, because unless the FBI and the judicial branch of this government and the Justice Department really finds these people, arrests them, charges them, and they're held accountable, I'm really quite worried about the future.
Yeah, well, we talked about this last week, and the FBI has to take this, and I'm sure they are taking it very seriously. And they have to arrest all the people who participated and all those who organized. And also we have to take a very careful look at all these politicians who have been egging, their constituency to reject the results of the election and calling them, and have called them really to march into the Capitol. I think these are important things, but I want to actually move on. I call this the day after, right? The day after waking up and knowing that Trump is not in Washington, D.C., and knowing that Trump is not on my Twitter feed. Of course, this has not been the case for about, a week or so since Twitter basically canceled
almost 2 weeks.
Account.
Yeah, I think it's been 2 weeks
Almost 2 weeks. But in general, in the news, with a very short story, somebody took a picture of him playing golf, I guess in Mar-a-Lago. But he's out of the picture. This is definitely the day after. I thought Biden's message was a good one. I mean, his speech was a good one. Offered hope, as you said. Now the issue of implementation. The other things is you and I will have to talk about what are, what's going to happen under this administration. What do we think? What are the changes? Now, let's start a little bit with the executive orders, which I thought there were the right move that, he showed
17. There were 17 executive orders.
Yeah, he rolled up his sleeves and he and Kamala Harris went to work and started to reverse all these crazy executive orders that were put in place by the Trump administration. For example, on immigration, Biden's called Congress to grant permanent status and path to citizenship to Dreamers. Right. I really feel bad for those Dreamers because under Obama, and then that would have been 4 years ago. That's when they were given hope towards the end of the Obama administration that the Dreamers, they had a path to citizenship. Then came Trump, canceled it. Now they're back again. Biden is defending the Dreamers program for these undocumented young immigrants. They're really, many of them who came to this country, no fault of their own. They were several months old or they were all basically minors. So I think that's a good move. And then ending the so-called Muslim travel ban. That's another crazy Trump thing, which basically Trump launched in 2017, restricting travel and immigration from to the U.S. from Syria, Iran, Iraq, Sudan, Libya, Somalia, and Yemen. Then later on, he added Eritrea, Nigeria, Myanmar, Kyrgyzstan, and Tanzania in 2020. I mean, he's just like, because he wanted to add like some countries that weren't a
Muslim
Muslim majority to, because it came under criticism. And so now Biden has instructed the State Department to restart visa applications for these countries. And then, of course, changing the priorities for ICE. That was like a top priority under Trump, chasing after undocumented immigrants in this country and putting all the resources to Homeland Security to do that. And then, of course, the biggest joke of all of these was, Trump was supposed to build the wall and make Mexico pay for it. And we know he only repaired a few sections of the wall and built very little. But anyway, that was the campaign. And that's what his supporters lived by. This is what, they were like thinking that he was actually building the wall. So Mr. Biden will end the national emergency declaration cited by the Trump administration to divert money to the building of the southern wall. Because this is how Trump, after he was uncovered that he was full of it, that he was basically joked. It was the joke of Mexico, because Mexico wasn't sending any money to the United States to build the wall. And then he had to create an emergency, Jess, and so to divert federal money to start building the wall. Of course, he accomplished very, very little of that, if any, because, like as I said, he just was replacing sections of that or segments of that wall that was already in place. So, what else?
Well, the one executive order that I was very pleased to see, Jamal, was the implementation of the Defense Production Act, which utilizes the full force of the federal government in an emergency to call upon private sector manufacturing to get involved with the production, distribution, and implementation of the COVID-19 vaccination plan. The bad news with all of this, Jamal, is that very few people are still getting vaccinated. And even though the Trump administration promised 20 million people to be vaccinated by the end of December, the actual number of people that have been vaccinated so far is so low, we're actually throwing out vaccine because it's past an expiration date or it hasn't been kept cold enough. So we are not
because there is no coordination. I've actually went to my dentist when I go Tuesday, just a couple of days ago, Jess, and she has not received her vaccine yet, and she's a dentist. And then her daughter, who works with her in the office, received her vaccine 2 hours north of San Francisco. I forgot the name of the town, but she couldn't receive it in San Francisco. They're overwhelmed, as you know, at UCSF and Kaiser. She had to drive 2 hours to a town like by Highway 5, I forgot the name of it, and stood in line and received it. But here is the thing. The Biden administration is going back. I don't know if this is helpful or not, but it seems to be helpful to they are restructuring the federal government coordination for the COVID-19 pandemic, and they're bringing back the Obama era position called the Directorate for Global Health Security and Biodefense.
Well, but those are all good things, Jamal, because, and again, I always bring sobering news about COVID to our listeners and our viewers. But the announcement, for example, in California, where we're broadcasting from, that anybody over 65 can get the vaccine, they've had to reverse that because
75.
but not, they said 60.
But I know on the ground from people and neighbors, only people who are over 75 received an
Well, they
email
had to
saying
change
now
it.
They had to make an appointment.
They had to change, and I'll tell you, they had to change it because right now, and there's barely enough vaccine to vaccinate everybody who's had a first shot and everybody who's over 75 to get us through June. And that leaves so many people who are not going to be able to get vaccinated because the Biden plan was 1 million vaccines
In the first 100 days.
in the first 100 days. I don't see that happen still. I'm sorry.
Even if they use the National Guard and Navy.
Well, this is what I said last week, Jamal. We need to bring the National Guard out. We need to use every pharmacy in the United States. We need to use every stadium, every convention center. We need to have mass vaccination sites. Now, we could do that, but then the problem is there's still not enough vaccine to get out there. Johnson & Johnson may get approved within the next 2 weeks for their 1-dose vaccine. And there are other companies that are trying to get the emergency use authorization. But the reality is, Jamal, we're in a very dark period of the COVID-19. More variants are coming out. We don't have enough vaccine. Not enough people are getting vaccinated in their arms. And so for the Biden administration to authorize the Defense Authorization Act to get the private sector more involved in PPE, manufacturing and distribution of the vaccine gives me a little bit of hope that they're on it. But there's going to be a month or two delay. And before the people who really need to get this vaccine, which is everybody basically, we're really talking about people not getting fully vaccinated probably till September, maybe even later, Jamal, because there is not enough vaccine to go around right now. So, I mean, bravo to the Biden administration for doing this. But the really painful reality is that the Trump administration bungled this, was so ridiculous in what it decided to do, Project Warp Speed, making vaccine, that they never figured out a plan how to get it into people's arms. And even with Warp Speed, Jamal, we still don't have enough vaccination.
Well, we knew this, all along, and I don't think, the Biden administration, of course, is aware of this. So it's like I said, this is something that was messed up by the Trump administration. And what I look at is kind of evaluating what the Biden administration is going to be doing. They seem to be very cognizant. They seem to be on top of things. They seem to be restoring, all these things and trying to do the coordination and trying different plans. And some of the positive things that they've been doing, also they rejoined the WHO, the WHO organization, also the things about Paris
the
environment. Yeah, so I feel they're hands-on. I feel at least, it's not enough to say that's 24 hours, but they're hitting the ground running because they've been evaluating and have their advisors. They're very much aware of what the damage that was caused by the Trump administration. But I want to look at kind of like the longer picture, the future picture, the expectations. We know, as far as the country, I feel I'm in better hands under a Biden administration than Trump as far as trying to find solutions to deal with COVID. If what's happening now, this is not because they've kind of botched it, as you said, this is Trump's thing. But I'm also looking at everything else. Hopefully by September, I'm fine. I'm kind of like resigned myself that this is not going to be a fast solution. People get vaccinated, then I'm thinking about the economy. Are we going to be able to bounce back? I'm thinking about our international position. I'm thinking about what's happening with the crazy things that the Trump administration did in the Middle East, like moving the embassy into Jerusalem.
But they've already made a statement on that, Jamal. the designate elect of the State Department, Mr. Blinken, has already announced that there's no plan to change the embassy being in Jerusalem. He did make that announcement.
Yeah, but they said about this, but that also it's not just the venue itself; it's also the reaction, and like basically Trump has severed all communications with the Palestinians. By the way, there was like a little, I don't know if it was a snafu or what, but for just a couple of hours, the ambassador's designation on Twitter, his designation was changed, or his label was changed from the U.S. ambassador to Israel to the U.S. ambassador to Israel, West Bank, and Gaza.
Yeah, I saw that. Was that a hack?
And then
was that a hack or
I
a
don't
message?
know, and then it was changed. No, I think what they're trying to do is having that ambassador also represent, because and restart or reactivate the consul general position, because Trump has shut down the consul general position or the consulate for Palestinians to use, and this was in Jerusalem for Palestinians living in the West Bank, Gaza, and now it's called the consular affairs. I think he will change that. That can be done very easily to address this. But then there is also the recognition of, there's worse than this. Like, to me, the venue issue is one thing, but also like the Trump administration has recognized the annexation of the settlements in the West Bank, saying that's fine, facts on the ground are facts on the ground. The settlers can keep what's theirs. They also recognize Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights. Is that going to continue? These are.
But see, Jamal, I think these are very important
issues.
Yeah, but that's going to be a litmus test, at least when it comes to foreign policy, specifically on the question of Palestine. Even though Blinken said that they were not going to move the embassy from Jerusalem back to Tel Aviv, we see a series of, missteps, disregard for Palestine and for Palestinian, outright kind of, thumbing their nose at international law by the Trump administration in regards to Palestine. These are all easy things that the Biden administration can do. They cannot accept the legitimacy of settlements. They cannot accept the legitimacy of an attempt to to occupy the Golan Heights. They could reestablish contact with Palestinian leadership, although that's a separate issue. These are what I would call in the diplomatic world, Jamal, low-hanging fruit to show the Democratic Party and progressives and the international community that the Biden administration is on the side of international law. I am not optimistic about that. I don't think they're going to touch the issues of Palestine or other issues in the Arab world, North Africa and the Gulf for some time, because they basically have 2 years, Jamal. The Biden administration has 2 years to spend its most important political capital. And unfortunately, I don't think they're going to spend any of it on making right all the wrongs that the Trump administration did when it came to Palestine.
They started very quickly, at least on the domestic level. And if you want to connect that to some international level with reversing the Muslim ban, I think makes a lot of Muslims in this country and around the world kind of happy to see that go. But then if we're going to also, and I know like with Palestine, there is the terminology that we always use, which is PEP, right? What's a PEP?
Progressive except for Palestine, yeah.
Okay, we understand that game. We've played that game. We've seen it being played many times before. But then there are other issues like, what about Saudi Arabia? What about the,
What about Egypt?
Trump gave Saudi Arabia a wink and a nod when they murdered Khashoggi, a resident of the United States who lived right in the capital in Washington, D.C., and then Trump looked the other way and instead rewarded Saudi Arabia by saying that they are going to sell Saudi Arabia more advanced weapons and planes. And then, of course, what happened, with all the charade in Washington, D.C. about getting all these representatives of the Emirates, Bahrain, and so forth sign this peace treaty, or not peace treaty, I guess, reestablishing
Diplomatic relations, normalized
with
relations.
Israel. And of course, at the expense of the Palestinians, but they all expected something. You know, they all expected to get in return mostly weapons, right? That's what they expected. That's what the Emiratis expected. Is this going to happen under a Biden administration? What's going to happen with Yemen? Are we going to keep arming the Saudis while they're bombing the hell out of the Yemenis? What's going to happen with there? What's going to happen in Iraq? What's going to happen with Syria? We're still somewhat engaged. What's going to happen in Afghanistan?
And Iran. And Iran.
And then of course the big question is the Iran nuclear, so-called nuclear program. So there is, a bunch of questions when it comes to security and international affairs in the Middle East. They can't bury their head in the sand and ignore
I'm afraid,
these.
But I'm afraid that they will have to bury their head in the sand temporarily, Jamal, because the three or the two biggest agenda items right now for the Biden administration, I think there are three, but there's the COVID pandemic, there's the economic devastation that's being brought to this country because of the COVID pandemic, and then the third thing I think is the assault on democracy by white supremacists. I think that's got to be his main focus of attention and where he spends his political capital. I don't know when he's going to turn to international affairs. All of the things that we just brought up are really important in terms of reestablishing stability in the world. But if you're asking me to be hopeful about international diplomacy and all of the, and all of the illegal, immoral, unethical things, corrupt things that the Trump administration did on the global stage, with diplomacy, I don't see it happening. And here's the other thing, Jamal. If we're talking about holding people accountable, will the Biden administration, this is a question for you, will the Biden administration hold the Israelis accountable for all of their illegal activities? I mean, Trump and Bibi Netanyahu and Trump and the American-Israeli kind of relationship never saw a better 4 years. Never. The number one ally, they would always say, is, were the Israelis, which is not true by any stretch of the imagination, just the thing that you say. My question to you, Jamal, will the Biden administration hold the Israelis accountable for their breaches of international law? What do you think?
As much as they've done during the Obama administration,
which is very little. Very little.
We know Biden is pro-Israel. He stated this more than once. We know the action at the Senate and Congress and so forth. This is something that's going to take a long time to change public opinion, not only of the American public opinion, but also change the public opinion right there on the Hill. That's going to be an uphill battle. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. However, I recall actually, because I was in 2016 in Palestine, the last year of the Obama administration. And at the time, the Secretary of State, Kerry, was having this shuttle diplomacy going and coming back every couple of weeks, sometimes every month, trying to push the Netanyahu administration. And if you remember, that was the first time that Barack Obama asked his United Nations ambassador not to veto.
Right.
Remember that veto, and the Israelis were all upset, and their surrogates at Congress. It was the very first time that the United States refrained from vetoing a resolution to protect Israel.
Right.
And so they didn't do that. And Obama was very peeved with Netanyahu. Kerry was very upset. I don't know about Biden, but I am sure he was in the middle of these things. So I think that they'll carry on from that level. That, of course, Israel's security comes as a number one, as a priority. that we're not going to push Israel to do certain things, that it's not, but they're not going to let them having this wanton kind of behavior, grabbing everything left and right that they've done. What happened during the past 4 years kind of outperformed everything that the Israelis have done in 40 years, that kind of like on the fast track, grabbing everything, getting everything that they've wanted and more. In fact, they were getting things that the Israelis didn't want. I mean, they were throwing things at them left and right. And I don't think that will happen. I think there has to be a rebalancing of policies when it comes to the Middle East and also the allies and how Trump approached Arab countries in general.
Well, I appreciate your optimism, Jamal. I really do. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Well, we're not going to judge it now. We're just thinking about it down the line. But anyway, there is a lot to talk about. We'll talk about this. There's a couple of things. We have maybe 10 minutes or so, or less than that. No, actually, we have 5 minutes,
right,
Jess. I was like looking at the things that the last 24 hours of the Trump administration and all the pardons he was like handing left and right. And this morning I was reading also about a pardon that was given to Judge Jeanine Pirro,
her husband.
Her ex-husband. Her ex-husband, actually. He pardoned him because she saw the list. I mean, look at these people, how much access they had to the President of the United States, those Fox people. They actually received a list in advance before anyone else and saw the names the people who were on the pardon list, and she didn't see her husband's name on the list, and she had a fit, and Trump decided to pardon him the last hours.
Yeah, but
this is how much influence.
Right. I'm just very relieved that Lil Wayne got his pardon because, of all the deserving people on death row or who, are languishing, people of color languishing in prisons who really deserve pardons and clemency, thank God that Lil Wayne was able to get a pardon from President Trump. But it was actually ridiculous. Steve Bannon, Lil Wayne, Jeanine Pirro's ex-husband. This was an interesting one. Elliot Broidy. Elliot Broidy.
Steve Bannon, his case has not been heard. I mean, these guys are receiving others who are, they've already been convicted, but Steve Bannon has not been convicted yet.
He got a get out of jail free card, Jamal.
Exactly. That's what he got out. And that's why I think that Trump probably has a get out of jail card for himself in his pocket and for his family, but he did not tell anyone about. I'm serious. I'm not that he could have had this, one, for example, to Rudy Giuliani, his daughter, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, whatever. Maybe we don't know. I mean, we don't know about these, that they were already made. I mean, maybe we'll find out about these in a month or two, but who knows?
Well, I want to throw out a few things in the little time we have left, Jamal. I stand by my prediction that we're not done with Donald Trump. That's number one. He will be a fixture for years to come. If you listen to what Lindsey Graham said yesterday, that the Republican Party should still follow Donald Trump no matter what. Number two...
on this thing, actually, and also McCarthy walked back, but he said that he was responsible for what happened on the
That's right. So
and then today or earlier, he said, no, that wasn't his fault.
Of course. And I predict that Ivanka Trump will run for the Senate against little Marco Rubio. I predict that Republicans will double down on white supremacy and Donald Trump, that we are far away, Jamal, from getting rid of Donald Trump or the scourge of the white supremacy tinged Republican Party. There's going to be most likely a civil war, if there is one, within the Republican Party well before anything else happens. I mean, because Mitch McConnell has made his position quite clear. There's a lot of infighting going on. And maybe after a few rounds of golf is over, trust me, we haven't heard the end of Donald Trump.
Well, you're right. I mean, we have to see, I guess. But at least on the good news is he's out, and the Congress is still under the control of the Democrats. The Senate is split 50-50, but they'll take over. Here is one trivia, Jess. The Senate is split 50-50. However, the Democrats represent 41 million more Americans. I was looking at these stats.
Wow.
If you take the 41 million Americans, but yet it's split 50-50. And that's something just to reflect on this whole electoral process.
Well, we could only hope that this electoral college, this antiquated throwback to appeasing slave owners, which is really where it comes from, Jamal, to make sure that slave owners and the slave states could maintain their power, because they knew that the actual vote of the people would always be far greater. So we can only hope that we'll get another amendment someday in the next generation to get rid of this antiquated, slave-driven electoral college.
On that note,
on that optimistic note,
you've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download our latest episodes. And it's a new morning in America.
Yeah.
Let's hope the sun keeps shining and we stop talking about Trump. But my friend here just thinks that we're going to be hearing and reading about his name for the next 4 years.
I hope I'm wrong, but I'm sorry. We'll see you all next week.
See you next week.